Hello listeners, and welcome to Plugged In, the Energy News podcast where we bring the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. In this episode, we're digging into quite a technical topic, but one that could have far-reaching consequences for the way companies verify their green credentials. It is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and potential changes to the accounting standard that most businesses across the world use to report their direct and indirect emissions or how green they really are. On the 20th of October, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol launched two 60-day public consultations, inviting input from professionals across the industry to share their thoughts on proposed changes to the current guidance. So, what do businesses across Europe think of the current protocol, and what are some of the changes we are likely to see at the end of the consultation? Earlier this week, I was at the Resource Conference in Amsterdam, where I sat down with our guests for this episode and our own Italy correspondent, Elena Trabattoni. We talked about how the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's rules for Scope 2 emissions and market-based accounting rules affect real-world deals and what companies across Europe actually need to help meet their net zero targets. So we're right here in the middle of the bustling Beurs van Berlage, the former stock exchange building, here in the heart of Amsterdam, where nearly 1,500 industry professionals have congregated to hear about issues affecting corporate renewable energy procurement. But one of the hottest topics at the moment is GOs, guarantees of origin, and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Alina, welcome.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be here.
Could you just explain to our listeners what the response has been to the proposed changes in the protocol? What are you kind of hearing from your sources close to the matter?
Well, do you know what? For sure, there's a lot of debate at the moment. And I think what it boils down to is a lot of excitement around the push for globally recognized standards, accounting standards of sorts, something that creates a solid, very clear framework for measuring and reporting these emissions, basically across companies, governments, organizations as well, in a very clear, clear way. And I think crucially the debate is focused on whether we need more transparent methods or not, and methods that would allow for very easy or at least easier comparison globally as well. And, as it always does with climate-related issues, the conversation is getting quite heated. People are getting very passionate. On the one side, you have those very much pushing for granular reporting, so very, stringent, clear, transparent reporting. And that's NGOs, companies, regulators, and of course, big tech, the Googles of this world. And they very much advocate for it. And they see it as essential for getting to net zero, for real decarbonization. And of course, there's also a lot of opposition. And that mainly comes from some other industry groups, energy suppliers, power authorities as well, who are basically very concerned not so much about the transparency per se, which they back, but about the complexity and the costs that it would all bring on board, making it also a barrier for the smaller players in the market. And some of them, of course, worry that these stricter rules could conversely slow down a market move towards, complete green transition, net zero, decarbonization, and make it more difficult for some firms to operate across these complex systems.
Excellent, but what does it mean in concrete terms in terms of the energy transition?
Well, that's a very good question. From a green energy use and a net zero transition point of view, it would allow for a series of mechanisms and instruments to be embedded into the frameworks. And let's take, for example, location and time signals. These are these so-called hourly and location matching reporting methods that would be included into emissions accounting. And this basically means that companies would need to match their renewable energy use to the actual hours of green energy that they use and the actual locations the green energy comes from, not just annual totals, which is the case right now, used to offset credits, in some cases even from distant regions, which becomes very generic and unclear and, to be honest with you, is criticized because it allows for a lot of gray areas and, in some cases, in some extreme cases, even greenwashing. And so, the idea is to strip away these vague, mismatched green claims and, in a nutshell, incentivize the use of clean energy when and where it's produced.
Fantastic, Alina. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. So what do big businesses say about guarantees of origin and the greenhouse gas protocol? Well, I'm pleased to be joined by Karen and Addy, Head of Commercial at Procurement Platform Renewable, and Killian Daly, Executive Director at EnergyTag, a non-profit think tank. A warm welcome to you both.
Thank you very much for having us.
So I think the hot topic, we're here at Resource, the conference in Amsterdam, in this grand old building, the old exchange, they're called the Beurs. And one of the hot topics at this conference, the Resource conference, has been the greenhouse gas protocol and potential changes to it. Maybe if I can start with you, Killian.
Yeah.
What is the greenhouse gas protocol and why is it significant?
Sure. So the greenhouse gas protocol is basically the carbon accounting rules used by about 97% of the Fortune 500 companies to report their emissions. So it's kind of the set of rules companies use to calculate how many tons of CO2 do I have. And so the hot topic of, I suppose, today and this conference is the Scope 2 or electricity emissions accounting and proposed changes that are coming for that standard. By way of background, so I used to buy power for a French company called Air Liquide, got a wholesale power procurement at very large scale. And I then also used to do the carbon accounting using the greenhouse gas protocol. So I've worked with it practically also in the past and definitely saw, some areas of improvement potentially. And now I'm working, my day job largely is working on trying to improve the standard as a member of the technical working group that's updating with the greenhouse gas protocol.
Excellent. So, could you explain to those listeners, Killian, who may not be aware what Scope 1 and Scope 2 is, what the difference there is?
Yeah, so basically Scope 1, I don't want to bore people to death now with carbon accounting, but basically Scope 1 is the emissions you have directly from burning stuff in a factory. So you're burning gas to make heat or you're burning coal to make electricity. That's your Scope 1. It's on your operational sites. Scope 2 is really the emissions that are, output by someone else to supply you electricity.
Okay, yeah. So that's why here amongst the renewables conference, I think that's why it's so important. So sure, Carolyn. So who does it affect then? Who does the greenhouse protocol affect? I mean, it's not just the Fortune 500 or 100 companies. It's in the market more generally than that.
Yeah, it's the accounting standard for carbon accounting. So most companies who are doing any kind of carbon accounting will be using the GHGP.
Okay, excellent. And why are these so important, these accounting standards?
I suppose what you need a common baseline for companies to be measuring their carbon emissions so that we can accurately track where we are now, progress, etc. I think if you don't have a common baseline, it calls into question the accuracy of performance measures, target setting, etc.
And this is global rather than just European, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's voluntary, it's not mandatory. These are not obligations put on the companies.
No. So it's a choice of accounting standard that can be used, but they also underpin SBTi, RE100, CVP. So most of those kind of target setting frameworks will use the GHGP rules to underpin them.
Okay, absolutely. I think that's important as well. And even though we're sort of maybe in a bit of a backlash against some kind of sustainability criteria, are you seeing that, Killian, at the moment?
It depends where you are. Obviously, so we have teams in the US as well, and obviously there's a very open backlash there. Not everywhere, right? The US is a big place, and some states are actually doubling down. I was in China last week. There's definitely not a backlash against clean energy there. They are running in the opposite direction to the US. So I think we need to also think about other parts of the world. In Europe, I don't think maybe there's a backlash to sustainability or a little bit to green energy, but I think in Europe ultimately we don't have a choice, right? We actually have to go and decarbonize for energy security reasons, for competitiveness reasons. So I think there's other pillars in Europe because we don't have cheap gas. That means that we kind of need to go down this path. You mentioned sustainability standards, so the EU does have corporate sustainability reporting directive. That is being kind of trimmed down, but it will still apply to large companies, and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is one of the methodologies that's mentioned in that standard. So there are regulations that are also kind of requiring companies to report, and GHGP is the main way that is used by most companies to do that. So there are examples of regulations as well that are kind of requiring this reporting. Simply put, well, like, why do accounting standards matter? Like, well, imagine we had no common standards for financial accounting and everyone could just make up essentially what profit they had this year and according to what best suited them. There'd be no comparability. We wouldn't be able to track what businesses are performing well and what are not performing so well. And I think that's one of the, I suppose, today's Scope 2 standard was, first defined like over 10 years ago. It was designed for a time with very little renewables on the grid to get like maybe a market started. There's some like pretty glaring concerns or inaccuracies in today's standard that mean that there's a number of very large companies that already report no emissions, and that's not really reflective of what we actually need to do to have no emissions as a society or as a kind of even a power grid,
But are any companies kind of, there's a big commitment to the protocol, right? As far as I can see it, Barry. And so I think there's not people are kind of saying, no, we don't need to go ahead with this, or there's, or we're gonna do our accounting in a different way. There is commitment from the big tech, from smaller companies to be part of this or to set these guidelines.
Yeah, I don't think there's so much a pushback against it. I think it's more about what the changes should look like. There's quite a lot of discussion going on around that. So the updates are under public consultation now, and everyone should be taking the opportunity to have their opinions heard. So there's maybe some discussions about how it should evolve, but whether it should evolve, I don't think is under dispute.
Because what we're talking about in particular now, I think we'll take the discussion into what the impact, the consequences are for the guarantees of origin market. So the way that you verify the power that you produce is green. So what are the changes on the table then, Karen? You mentioned the change. I think there's a nice bridge into what we're going to discuss now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I will jump in by Killian is much more well versed in it. But fundamentally, it's about increasing the traceability and credibility of reporting. So currently, a lot of corporates will be reporting on an annual basis. And we're essentially moving to more spatial, locational matching and more temporal matching, so that you can actually say that every hour of consumption or what you're reporting as clean energy is actually matched by production.
So that's one area. The other is there more like discussions around deliverability. Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful, or basically how you deliver that.
I think, a good model for what's being proposed is essentially how the power market works. So today the power market works on a 15-minute matching basis. That's how power is settled, and in regions where power is deliverable or where you have a single price of power. And so the basic idea is that the proposal on the table is that, let's say after 2030, so after a phase-in period, just large companies, so a subset of companies will have to do hourly reporting of where their energy is coming from. So it doesn't mean they have to match every single hour to be 100% clean every hour, but it does mean that they can, for example, claim to use solar power in the middle of the night like they can today. And it will also mean this more market boundaries that are better representing reality. So, if you're in Portugal, you probably won't be able to say that I'm 100% Norwegian hydropowered, because that isn't physically real. You can't actually do that. You can't ring a power supplier in Norway and get your power delivered to Portugal, right? So it'll tighten up a little bit, the types of claims that are being made today that have too light a link to the reality of how the power grid and the power markets work. Of course, I mentioned there'll be flexibilities to this. SMEs will not have to do the hourly accounting. You can use things like load profiles if you don't have hourly data for all your sites. So, it's something that's, I think, going to be measured and phased in appropriately, but making some pretty fundamental changes to the accuracy of the accounting.
But, does that mean that the market needs to change? That there's something in terms of the framework or the architecture or the regulation that is lacking, that enables, that needs to be tightened up? Caroline, what's your view?
It's the visibility. So it's having the tools to see where, so from a corporate's point of view, where their consumption is being matched by the solutions that they're procuring. So be they unbundled EACs, some kind of green tariff, a PPA, getting the data available to match consumption and production. So the data is there. It's about getting hold of it and having a system in which you can use to essentially report that and then act on it. So first stage for most companies will be visibility, and then they can work out, right, what can we achieve? What ambition should we now set around this hourly piece? And then how are we going to achieve that? But the kind of, they need the foundational understanding of what it looks like now.
But in terms of the hourly matching, I think that's quite interesting. Yeah, you said that, because so companies match the hourly profile. Doesn't mean they have to be 100% green. Should they be striving to be 100% green?
Ultimately, yes, but being really 100% green is hard, unless you're in Norway or Iceland. Then it's a different story. But like if you're in Germany, being 100% renewable for the German system is very hard, and we should strive towards that. But we have a problem, I think, if companies are 100% renewable, but the grid is 50. Like what exactly is going on there? So I think the end goal, of course, should be 100% real, clean powered. But that might mean different things in different places. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, again, it's just an accounting methodology. So it'll just be like, what are my emissions? Not that I must have zero emissions by year X. That's very important. The second thing is that obviously we have a lot of companies who are 100% renewable already. So like all the big tech companies are already done, like they according to today's rules. And again, right, that's good, and it's fantastic that they're in these markets buying renewable energy, but it's not really accurate to say that they are 100% green, because they're obviously still not green at nighttime when there's no wind or sun, but they're using credits from the daytime. So I think it's like maybe a bit of a reset about some of these targets. Some of the being 100% renewable right away next year is the only acceptable thing, and realizing that decarbonization is hard, and in some grids it's extremely hard, and so we need to maybe 80% green is already a great thing in Germany, right?
Yeah.
But really not based on kind of a kind of a fudged accounting.
I also think it's a really important point that I think when we talk about this change, I think we often focus on potential challenges and how difficult it might be for companies to move towards it. And I think sometimes that's overblown. I also don't think that because something's difficult, we shouldn't do it. I also think there's a strong opportunity for particularly kind of climate leaders, the front runners, that, as Killian said, they've probably already been 100% renewable for a number of years. Right? What is their next step? Where can they put some R&D and some resources into something that shows more credible impact, and they get the benefit from it? Otherwise,
just be able to sit back and say, we've done our bits, now it's up to the rest of the...
Exactly, but a lot of them don't want to. But in order to get the resources to plough into the work that's required, they need to be able to show some benefit. And, a lot of them they're answering to investors and various stakeholders, so they want to be able to say, okay, we're going further, we're pushing the envelope here. So I think, often, as is often the case, there's an opportunity as well as a challenge.
And just maybe to give an example, so like I think, to get to zero, I think as a company or as a society, right, like we need to build loads more renewables. We also need a lot more batteries. We need a lot more demand flexibility. We probably need like clean firm solutions in some countries, right? Like, so there's a lot of boxes that need to be ticked. Today in the PPA market, about 1% of PPAs have storage in them. I think hardly any European countries are issuing guarantees of origin for storage. So like, we have a long way to go yet, right? Like if we're not like thinking about demand response, storage, other solutions that firm up renewables, that's only half the job done. And so if we have an accounting system that basically says you are done just from buying wind and solar and maybe a bit of hydro, it's not capturing the full picture.
Yeah, no. And I think that's I think this is quite crucial as well, isn't it? I think in the terms of matching. I mean, there's a discussion around whether you buy these guarantees of origin or whether you say the grid is 100% or whatever renewable, therefore I'm 100% renewable. So this location versus market based. I mean, I think does this put an end to that kind of discussion or debate, or will it?
No. So with the update, both location and market based will continue. They will just have slightly different kind of criteria.
I think. So, of course, both will continue in the reporting, but I think sometimes because of the way the market-based rules work today, they're not really, you take Norway, right? So Norway exports about 20 terawatt hours of electricity in a year and about 120 terawatt hours of green power, green certificates. So 6 times more than it actually ever could in power. And so you end up with these situations in the accounting where like a company who doesn't buy any GEOs in Norway and market-based accounting is like fully powered by fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Even though, and then people are like, well, hang on, what's going on? Like everywhere, there's hydro all around me. And I think that some of the disconnects between the location and market-based method, I think will be somewhat resolved with these changes, because it kind of draws the market-based method back more to reality, but crucially still enables people to go out into the market and buy green energy and make a change, something that you cannot do in the location-based method.
Because at the moment, it does lay people open to criticism about greenwashing.
Sure.
And then a aluminium producer in Iceland or Norway in a 100% renewable system will look at their power bill and say, okay, it's mainly fossil fuels, which is people will question that, and I think So of course, they're quite rightly so. I mean, but it will go the changes to the greenhouse gas protocol will go some way to reduce those kind of potential accusations.
I think so. Yes. Like I have talked to the aluminium smelters in Norway, in Iceland, who have pretty significant concerns with the current methodology for how this accounting works. They're kind of being powered by fossil fuels in Iceland, even though there are none, because the certificates are going to Europe, and Iceland has no interconnection to Europe. So some of this stuff will be fixed in this new approach. And I think another thing, it'll really put more of a value on like truly green production, right? Like these guys in Iceland, they are competing with basically aluminium smelters in the Middle East who are powered by 100% by gas, but then buy RECs from some nearby nation, bring them in, and then green up their aluminium production in a way that is not at all physically linked to the real world, like the real electricity supplying them. And these things are not, they're just not a good incentive structure to be serious about decarbonizing like heavy industries like aluminium.
But could it also be the case that it'll put a stop to, for example, green produced in Norway, Iceland, for example, Sweden, selling certificates to Portugal, as you mentioned earlier, or to the Dutch railway company, and so that they can then claim that they're green?
Well, I think you start putting a value on EACs created at different times. And as soon as you do that, you start creating a market for it. And so EACs that are generated in times of low supply have higher value, and whoever is demanding them will pay for them. So it's also, while it's an accounting standard, it's also helping derive some market signals to move towards a fully diversified energy system within country, which is what we all need. And we're talking about a lot of this kind of redistribution across markets is because you don't have the correct market signals. So that's the end goal.
One and EACs, could you just explain that to the listeners?
Energy attribute certificates.
Sorry, you girl. Akron soup. Maybe just on that, there's a very important point, because in the rules that are being proposed, essentially yes, in Europe it's like in country, except if you can actually prove that there's interconnection, and so Norway can and will still be able to export guarantees of origin to serve corporate customers in other parts of Europe, but only in a way that actually respects the actual electricity flows out of Norway. So, sure, they can maybe export 20 or 25 terawatt hours. If they build more interconnection, maybe they can do 50 if that's how much interconnection there is in the future, right? But it's going to be tied to this reality in a way that, kind of respects some basic limits, where today there is no limit, right? You could, and I think almost the entire Norwegian hydro fleet is exporting its certificates across Europe in a way that ultimately dampens the signal to build more renewables in the Netherlands, for example, because they're just taking the Norwegian hydro and using it there, even though it's not really supplying them.
I mean, that's very interesting. So that could maybe reduce some of the supply coming from Norway, certainly from Iceland.
Yes, yeah, certainly from Iceland. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. The market is oversupplied and has been for years. Like the price, I think, 2 weeks ago I looked at the future prices of guarantees of origin. It's about 40 cents a megawatt hour, right? So that's not material enough to really drive, additional investments in renewable energy.
But I'd imagine maybe the big Norwegian and Icelandic utilities may not be so happy at losing their markets there. But does it mean you have to match each megawatt across the cables and then from from production to consumption?
If you're doing a cross-border,
Yeah.
well, it will mean that, there will be like a mechanism kind of similar to how you physically transfer electricity and like do contracts across border to make sure that, that the number of certificates going across the border, let's say 20 units of electricity is going across, that only 20 units of certificates are not 100,
So, I mean, these could have significant changes in the way that the market is operating, and certainly the guarantees of origin. So, Carolyn, what has been the response from the market so far to these changes or the proposed changes?
Super interesting. So I would say you've got certain sectors that are ahead on this. I would say the tech sector has been leading on this for a number of years. Also, we see a lot of interest from FMCG, so a lot of consumer-driven businesses. I would say it's a lot of the front runners. So RE100 members, RE100 member types want to be sustainability leaders. We see a lot of interest from there. A lot of them are, I would say, currently readying, trying to get visibility. So not so many are jumping in and setting any hourly matching targets at the moment, but they see the changes coming. They want to get ahead of it. So they're going, right, I need visibility now of what this looks like, what I might be able to aim for, and what there may be some cost implications.
Then you direction of travel then.
Yes. Yeah.
So like, if you take NG, for example, which I think is one of the biggest PPA suppliers in the world. So they have a stretch goal like for, I think, 20 or 25% of all of their PPAs to be 24/7 PPAs by 2030. So like they're really thinking about how do we move towards more hourly matched PPAs? How do we move towards products that are really matching the actual demand of consumers, right? Because ultimately, I think something that we maybe forget sometimes, unfortunately, because of these rules, is that, something like a PPA, ultimately, it needs to match as much as possible the demand of the consumer to hedge their electricity supply. And the PPA market obviously has been in decline. It's in severe decline in certain markets because of a lack of thinking and focus on, adding in batteries alongside solar, because today's market, at least the guarantee of origin market, just doesn't incentivize us to work on that problem, which we have to ultimately for a healthy PPA market in the future. Of course, some people are going to make money in different ways, I would say. Some people who make money today from selling, large amounts of guarantees of origin to countries where that's not deliverable, these rules are obviously going to be more challenging. But then people developing renewables and batteries in those countries where the 40-cent certificate is no longer available are obviously going to get more revenue.
Yeah.
So there's like any change, there's going to be kind of people who are more and less advantaged.
Absolutely. But is there? I mean, there's a simple solution to that, isn't that? Grant guarantees of origin to batteries if they're being fed from solar or wind. Grant them the guarantees of origin, which is not happening in many markets, is it?
Yes, I completely agree, and I think that needs to happen very quickly.
I'm glad we agree there. So, Carolyn, are there some concerns around the changes as well? Obviously there's a lot of positivity around. You mentioned the RE100 companies and the big people who want to be certified as green. But are there any concerns? We mentioned maybe some of the utilities maybe a little bit worried.
Well, so I tend to work mostly with the corporates who are going to have to abide by the changing rules. So it's around complexity and additional resources required, and what costs will be needed to cover, what it will mean for their sustainability targets. So when I say positivity, I would say it's those companies see the changes coming and they want to get ready. I think there's what that will look like. There is sort of caution. Some of them just see the opportunities. They're those kinds of companies. But it's complexity, it's resources required. Do they have to change internal systems? Platforms. Large companies that have a certain kind of EMS system that they're going to have to input, a new management system. So there's concerns around that.
Costs as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. If I can sort of round off, Killian, so what are the next steps? What happens next in the process? I mean, Carolyn mentioned the consultation process.
Yeah.
And so when does that close?
Yeah.
How long do you think? What happens after that?
I think and one of them just maybe on the concerns part. I think sometimes there's not everyone fully understands what is even being proposed right now. So there's still a lot of people who are like reading this thing, trying to understand what's going on. like I had a conversation yesterday with a large utility who, were confused and thought that this would mean that their customers would have to be 24/7 matched by 2035 or something, which is not at all what it says, So I think, a lot of the questions are literally just trying to understand exactly what the proposal is, and then, seeing where the opportunities are in that. In terms of the process, so 2 weeks ago, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol launched a public comment period, open for 60 days. So right now, just go on to Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 2, Google that and you'll see the public comment. It's open until December 19th. And so everyone is encouraged to respond to that. We're obviously at EnergyTag, for example, putting together like a guidebook. We're going to launch that later on today or tomorrow to help people understand and kind of demystify, because it's quite it's quite a complicated topic and there's a lot in the comment documents. But ultimately, it's really important that people kind of make their voices heard, so that we can be sure that whatever emerges at the end of this, at the end of this update, is both has high integrity and is also workable.
Absolutely. So I think when would the responses be published, and maybe their final conclusions?
So the public comment is going to be closed December 19. I suppose the first Q1 next year we're going to be crunching through all of that in the technical working group. Potentially there will be another public comment next year. It's not certain. And then the final publication of this is for 2027, alongside 3 other standards in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So on Scope 1, on Scope 3, and on some other stuff as well.
It's not. I mean, 2027 is not that far away, Carolyn. So I think so companies are already starting to look at the changes that they may have to make.
Yeah. So we still talk to companies who say, it's actually quite a long way down the line. We're not going to look at it yet. And I would say, particularly for very large companies who have a wide turning circle, if you're going to start like changing your systems internally, changing governance around this, we think you should be starting already to start looking at it, talking to internal risk and regulatory teams, etc. So getting your ducks in order, getting visibility, and that's also where you probably got the opportunity to kind of get ahead of this market. There's also some current procurement decisions that if you look at it through an hourly lens, you kind of get ahead in terms of getting better hourly coverage now.
Yeah.
When the changes come in, those kind of contracts will be in higher demand. So there's also kind of an ROI for looking at this earlier as well.
And I think maybe just one thing on that, I know that a lot of companies are already, looking at what's their hourly score, and I was talking actually yesterday to a very large supermarket chain in Belgium. They have 900 sites around the country, and they actually were like, you know what, initially when we heard about this, we were like, whoa, this sounds a bit complicated and scary. And then they realized, well, we actually have all of this data anyway because we need to check our bills and stuff, and that's how power is billed. And so a small team of them just went and looked at their contracts on supply side and looked at their demand and calculated their hourly score in-house, So I think once you kind of get started on it, it's not as daunting a task as it's first seems.
It's not that scary.
It's not that scary, exactly. It's not that scary, but eventually, once you kind of put your mind to it, it's also very far from being the hardest task that we're doing today.
There are also some very good platforms out there that you can use.
I'm sure.
I would say something that also we would really encourage, particularly all corporates, if they have any questions about it, we and other people who are involved in this are really happy to answer questions, because the more kind of stakeholder engagement in the public consultation, the better for everyone.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Killian and Carolyn, so much for clarifying and maybe demystifying some of this, which seems very daunting and scary. So thank you very much for being guests on the
thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
It's been an excellent and insightful discussion. I hope you agree, listeners. And thank you for tuning in to this episode. Our podcast episodes are released every Friday. For the latest news from Montel, please visit montelnews.com, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and other social media channels. See you next time.